Tonight I want to talk to you about an ordinary miracle. You can go ahead and be seated. I'm not real formal. Thank you, Sister Libby. I'll start with a story. I worked in elementary music for 8 years. Taught all of the kindergartners and fifth graders who came through our building, taught them music. It was called specials time when a grade level went to art, music, or Phi Ed. Okay, so I taught music. We had instruments. I played games. I tried to make it as exciting as I could make it because music is fun for me. Most of my students really preferred the scooter boats, the giant blow-up balls, the hula hoops, and all the really cool equipment that my Phi Ed teacher friend had. I mean, Phi Ed was the choice, let me tell you. And she was great. She's an amazing teacher, and her class is really fun. There were times where we would all get together and do Phi Ed as a grade level. So music, art, and Phi Ed all went to Phi Ed, and it was a blast. So I know what the students were experiencing with Ingrid. And she was sparkly. She was pretty inside and out. And she just had this sparkly way about her, and everybody loves Ingrid. I love her too. She's a good friend of mine. We still keep in touch. I'm not teaching there anymore. But one particular day, at the end of classes, I sent my second grade class out, and they were going to the classroom to get ready to go home on the bus. And I wandered down to the Commons and was chit-chatting with Ingrid after our day of classes, and all the students are lining up in the hallway with all their backpacks and their jackets, maybe their art projects, and got all their stuff. They're ready to go home. And they're getting ready basically to parade through, youngest to oldest, to get on the buses. And we're kind of standing there in the hall. They're coming down the hallway towards us, and you would see their eyes just light up, and they would run with their arms open for a big hug, and we both went like this. Guess where they went? To Ingrid. Not to me. No, they went to Ingrid. And I felt the rejection really strong. I had to go home and hug my kids and have them choose between me and Bud. Just kidding. We didn't do that. But I'm guessing if I took a poll this evening, you don't have to raise your hand, but I'm guessing that the majority of us have experienced in some way, in some measure, the pain of rejection. There's a malicious sting that accompanies rejection, and most of us, if we're honest, we're going to work really hard to avoid it. Not all of life's pain begins there, but I'd wager that a fair bit of our heartache can be traced back to those roots. When a door slams in your face, or you've been staying there knocking at the door for a long time, knocking on the same door. Nobody's answering. Both of those things feel like the same thing to me. Feels like rejection. So spiritually, of course, sometimes we stand at the door and knock. And sometimes God does not open that door. When that happens, maybe we need to look around, and consider that door isn't the only way. How many of us are just willing to do that? No, not me. No, definitely not me. But not you either? I wanted that door. And there was a reason I planned on it. I thought of all the things why that door would be the best one. But oftentimes, God has opened up another passageway. It may not even look like a real door. If we don't involve God as the sovereign, all-powerful creator, if we only involve him or look at him as the doorman, it's going to feel like God is rejecting our request. So are we rejected by God? Of course not. We know that that's not true. But, we know that God hasn't rejected us. But has it ever felt true? Have you ever found that what you know and what you feel are not the same? Now, we've heard that his timing is not always congruent with our timing. But if we involve God, acknowledging that he's omniscient, we can at least believe that he knows what's best. Even if we can't get to trust, we can at least acknowledge that he knows all and he knows what's best. So this is where our path diverges. We react or we respond to God's passage, forsaking the door we had hoped would open. And sometimes God's ways look and feel brighter and lighter and happier and refreshing to the body, the mind, and the spirit. Sometimes you walk through that door and you're like, man, this was the best thing ever. But that's not the focus of our study tonight. How do we react or respond when God's plan is painful? We've already decided that God knows all. Specifically, he knows what's best for us. And that's our starting point this evening. Now, while there are many responses to choose from, we're going to zero in on 3: resignation, acceptance, and submission. Let's get some working definitions going here because it's probably a good idea that we're all on the same page. Resignation is the acceptance of something undesirable but inevitable. It's gonna happen whether I want it to or not. I don't like it. That's resignation. I am resigned to the reality, resigned to whatever's happening. Acceptance is agreement with or belief in an idea, an opinion, or an explanation. It means I can be changed. My ideas, I can be in agreement with that. I can become agreeable to this belief. I noticed there was a note next to that one in the dictionary there. It said, willingness to tolerate a difficult or unpleasant situation. The willingness to tolerate a difficult or unpleasant situation. And the last one, submission. Okay, I found this really funny. That in resignation and acceptance, the example sentences were not too bad. I mean, it was just like acceptance, it's good for you. When you look up submission, it is not painted as the optimal choice. By the world's standards, it is suboptimal. But we're going to define it as yielding to a superior force or to the will and or authority of another. So we're going to yield to a superior force, to that will or to the authority of another. Okay, we're going to start with resignation and the story of the prophet Jonah. His story actually begins with defiance. We're not going to focus on that tonight, but I think we're all pretty familiar with defiance. If you've ever met a 2-year-old. God tells him to go to the Assyrian city of Nineveh and preach against the wickedness there. He says, actually, their wickedness has come up before me. These people were bad. So, let me backtrack. Jonah's thoughts and feelings are not recorded at the beginning of the story. Basically, if you look at the beginning of Jonah, it says, God says, go to Nineveh, and he doesn't say anything, he flees. It's like, and Jonah fled, in the way of Tarshish. So his feelings aren't recorded at the beginning of the story, but at the end, in Jonah 4 and verse 2, he says what he had said before to God. So let's take a look at that. And he prayed unto the Lord and then said, I pray thee, O Lord, was this not my saying when I was yet in my country? Therefore I fled before unto Tarshish, for I knew that thou art a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and of great kindness, and repentest thee of the evil. Repentest thee of the evil there, that just means that he would change his mind. If there were people that were willing to turn, he would stay his anger. He would change his mind. So I really like the Amplified version. He says, I pray you, O Lord, is this not just what I said when I was in my country? That's why I left. He said, when sinners turn to you and meet your conditions, you revoke the sentence of evil against them. I'm glad when that happens for me. And I'm glad Jonah wasn't sent to preach to me. So going through the story here, when God first called Jonah to preach in Nineveh, he fled because he didn't want the Ninevites to be saved. He wasn't afraid of them. He didn't have other plans. He just didn't want the Ninevites to be saved. Now, again, they were bad people. I mean, Jonah had reasons. However, God had opened a passage, and he asked Jonah to walk through it. If you remember, Jonah defies God and sets his course in the opposite direction. My dad wrote a song about this whenever I was a teenager and sang it for their college group class that they taught. I won't sing it for you now. But it's pretty good. But anyway, Jonah has a really remarkable encounter with the sailors of the ship, who ultimately throw him overboard at his advice. And also, these sailors were pretty interesting people, because though they didn't serve Jonah's God, they prayed to him and said, please forgive us for this. We don't want you to come angry at us because we threw your servant overboard. But they did what Jonah said, and of course, the storm subsided, and God had sent a giant fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah repents. Here is where we see the resignation. He repents of not following God, and he's thankful to be saved. He agrees to go to Nineveh, but we learn in very definite language he is not enjoying their change of hearts and God's mercy towards them. He even says at one point, he's like, I would rather die than sit here and watch these people be saved. So he resigned himself to the thing he didn't want to do because he knew that there was no other way. God was not letting him out of this. His story doesn't end well. It actually ends with a question. God is questioning him, and we don't know the answer. Interesting to think about, though. A better option can be found in the story of a young Jewish girl in the land of Persia. I feel like Esther's story is acceptance. Some people may argue with me that she's submissive, but hear me out. The king of Persia banished his queen, and then he began an elaborate process of selecting the next queen. Esther became that queen. It's a fantastic story. If you haven't read it yet, I encourage you, read this story. It's amazing. She's a beautiful orphan girl, cared for by her uncle Mordecai as if she were his own daughter. She finds herself as the king's new beloved queen. Man, that's a rags to riches story. But there's a bad guy in the story too. Haman was a man who hated the Jews, specifically Mordecai, her uncle. He convinced the king to make a decree that would cause the Jews to be pretty much wiped out. When Mordecai read the decree, he rent his clothes. He went sackcloth and ashes in the king's gate, and that's not allowed. So Esther sends to him, she sends clothing to him and said, you got to put some clothing on. You cannot do this here. This is not okay right here. And he sends back to her a message. He sent a copy of the decree to her, and he charged her to plead with the king for the lives of her people. There was a hitch. Everyone knew that if a person, a man or a woman, and she tells this to Mordecai, if anyone goes into the king's inner court without being called upon first, they'll be put to death. The only thing that can save that person is the act of the king extending his golden scepter, and then that person may live. So in Esther 4:11, she's telling this to Mordecai, and she finishes off saying, like, hey, don't forget this law. And she said, but I haven't been called to come to the king for these 30 days. 30 days, and he hasn't asked to see my face. What if I go in there and he just doesn't like me anymore? When Mordecai receives her response, he did not hold back. He's It's kind of like, you got to get your head in the game, girl. And Esther 4:13. Let's see if we can put that one up there. Our media team is awesome, by the way. They're really wonderful. Then Mordecai commanded an answer to Esther. Don't think that you're going to escape just because you live in the king's house more than all the rest of the Jews. For if you altogether hold your peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. He has no doubt that God is going to rescue them. His faith is not wavering that God will meet their need. But he's like worried about her. He said, don't think you're going to escape. But, the Jews will be saved from some other place, if not from you. But you and your father's house will be destroyed if that happens. And here it is, the phrase that has rung through the ages. And who knows whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Well, that did it. Esther responds with acceptance, agreement with, or belief in an idea, opinion, or explanation, that willingness to tolerate a difficult or unpleasant situation, in her case, a possibly deadly situation. She says, all right, verse 16, go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan and fast for me, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day, and I also and my maids will fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. I always get kind of like this dramatic feeling, and if I perish, I perish. But for her, it was real. She was facing death either way, honestly. But she certainly didn't want to face death at the hands of her king. The story ends magnificently with a few plot twists along the way. But the important part for us here is Esther's acceptance. She's willing to hear and change and accept what is and act upon it. Submission is the one we're really after. There's not a lot wrong with acceptance, but submission is another level. The very best example of submission is Jesus, the Garden of Gethsemane, all the way through his death on the cross. He was submitted. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. Think about it for a minute. For the joy that was set before him. What was that joy? You. It was you. You were the joy that was set before him. So he endured the cross. He was submitted to what he had to do to win you. But we're going to consider another human that's more like us regarding submission. Hundreds of years separated the last God-inspired writings of what we call the Old Testament and the angelic visitation received by a young woman named Mary. Though her people spoke of their longing for the Messiah and prayed for his coming, there hadn't been any official word to a prophet or a judge in a very long time. The silence was broken, well, really to Zechariah because of Elizabeth. But for Mary, in a mere 11 verses of Scripture, a single encounter with the supernatural, Mary's life is forever altered. This is not a one and done deal. I have this baby, and then, I'm out. Her life was forever altered. So Gabriel tells her that she's found favor with God, and the angel Gabriel, and that she will become pregnant with a son and call him Jesus. Gabriel goes on to tell her that Jesus will be called the Son of the Highest, that God would give him the throne of David, and that he'll reign over the house of Jacob forever, and there will be no end to his kingdom. That's pretty heady stuff. I mean, I'd still be stuck on, I found favor with God, right? So with all this whirling in her mind, she asks one question. She's considering what is and is not possible. How? How can she become pregnant when she had never been physically intimate? I mean, here she is, and all these things are being said to her, and she's just like, wait a minute. How? This is not in the realm of possibility. And then Luke, we're in Luke here, chapter 1, verses 35 through 38. And the angel answered and said unto her, the Holy Ghost shall come upon thee, and the power of the highest shall overshadow thee. Again, can you imagine what she's thinking? I mean, it's just like a tornado of amazing words being said to her. Therefore also that holy thing which shall be born of thee shall be called the Son of God. And behold, thy cousin Elizabeth conceived a son in her old age, and this is the 6th month with her, who is called barren. For with God nothing shall be impossible. So she's saying, how can this be? Because I don't even know anything about that yet. He says, no, hold on. Elizabeth, who was barren all these years of your own life, is having a son, and she's 6 months along. Don't you think that anything is impossible for God? And Mary says, behold the handmaid of the Lord. Be it unto me according to thy word. And the angel departed from her. There was no dissent. There was no defiance. Like, hey, this is going to ruin my plans. What about Joseph? There's no disbelief. Just an honest question. How? And then absolute submission. She got to be so close to Jesus all growing up and even throughout his ministry. She was one of the very few at the foot of the cross. Submission will take you places. Submission will take you places you don't want to go. Places that are confusing, difficult, unpleasant, but at the same time so incredibly rewarding and fulfilling. The Bible says he's the author and finisher of our faith. Your submission will not go unrewarded. So, remember the unanswered door and the alternate passage from earlier? Knocking and the doorman isn't answering. Each person we covered defied or could have defied God's passage. They were each met with a path from God that would prove to be difficult, possibly even deadly. Acceptance or submission is the attitude necessary to move towards God. So faith fueled by hope enables us to act on that choice. Hebrews 11:1, I bet you can all quote it. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the seen. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's evidence of what you can't even see. Okay, that sounds easy. Sounds really nice in that verse. And reducing these concepts into a simple illustration of doors and passages makes it seem pretty clear and pretty doable. And the people whose stories were written into Scripture, it's clear when they were and weren't making submitted choices. Like it's easy to see it. But pain, it's like a cloud. Pain from the past, or pain in our current circumstances. Fear of the future, fear of the unknown, fear of who and what we are or aren't. These things cloud our vision, and they also cause us to react in unhealthy ways. Ways that help us avoid or ignore acceptance and submission. We can ignore those. We can put those off if I pretend I don't see it, or if I'm just so wrapped up in pain that I can't really see it clearly. C.S. Lewis said that pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. He said that in the book, The Problem of Pain. But pain does insist on being attended to. When it hurts so bad, then we're ready to start changing, right? God uses our circumstances, just life circumstances. Maybe not even a door he's opened or a passageway he's offering. Maybe just life hits you hard. Sometimes it's not all orchestrated. Sometimes it's just chance. But God can use it. He can use it as an opportunity to show his strength in our weakness, our frailty, even our pain. Our response to accept, submit, walk in faith, and follow Jesus is fueled by hope. You may feel that you've lost hope, but you're still here. That's evidence that a spark or that little pilot light of hope is still burning somewhere inside you. There's a reason you're still coming. There's a reason you're still fighting and searching. So, your first step might be to make a change in your life. It propels you into the hope cycle. I'll talk about that in a second. So, you might start working on giving up that bad habit. You might fight the urge to isolate and actually reach out to a friend. You might lay down the distractions and make yourself available in your heart for God to speak to you. When we lay those things down, we do leave ourselves vulnerable. But we come to a point where what's going to hurt worse? From the Genesis Process author Michael Dye, he writes this: change happens when we take a risk. The ability to risk is an act of faith. You have to believe that if you risk, you will benefit from it. And that God blesses those steps of faith. That's how you end up taking a risk, is you have faith that you'll benefit from it. And for a believer, you'll believe that God will bless it. And so you're willing to take that risk because of your faith. By taking this step of faith, you gain hope. And like a circle, each part of the formula energizes the next. It begins with submission to God's sovereignty, accepting that his ultimate knowledge and goodness supersede our understanding. We can truly change by taking risks, which are an act of faith. The result is what I like to call an ordinary miracle. Hope. I hope that you have some things to think about maybe, or you just want to go back and read Jonah and Esther and Mary's story again, because they were very inspiring. But keep fanning that flame of hope. If you need to make a change, don't wait. Today's the day. And it's a good day to take a step of faith and take a risk.